Hi, and welcome to the Rogue RTS Camera Plugin overview. This will be a quick overview of the features of the plugin. If you're looking for support for the plugin, I highly recommend going to Discord, but you can also contact me through Patreon. In this video, I'm going to cover a few different things. If you want to skip ahead to something hereafter, the time codes are in the description. I'll be covering the features of the plugin, some bonus content that's in there, how to install it, the settings for the cameras, and I'll do a quick code review if you want to get into the code. The plugin features 3 RTS cameras. So the first camera I've called the look camera, and that's because when you rotate, it sort of pivots on the spot, so it's like a look around camera. So WASD drives it around, holding shift speeds things up, E and Q rotate the camera, and wheel mouse zooms up and down. The second camera is the pivot camera. And I've just called it the pivot camera because it pivots around a point where the other one looked around. This one pivots around on a point in the center there. You can still zoom and rotate. And then the third camera is the orthographic camera. They're quite different to the others, but still some RTS style games use this camera. In the demo here, I've got the ability to toggle some of the settings. So all the settings are driven by data objects and are updatable at runtime. So the first 3 are pretty self-explanatory. You can toggle zoom, rotation, and movement on or off. So if you've got a need for a camera that either doesn't zoom or doesn't rotate or doesn't move, you can set those options. The rotation stepping is a fixed angle rotation. So at the moment, it's a smooth rotation. If I turn this on, it now moves at a predefined angle each time, which it's set to 45 by default. There's going to be however many rotations to do a full circle, and all the cameras are the same for these settings, and you can set them up however you want. And then the same thing for the zoom. So the zoom can be a step as well, rather than one click on the mouse wheel is just a small amount. It can be a large amount. So it allows you to have like 3 levels of zoom rather than flexibility to zoom wherever. It's hard to really show because it still smoothly moves between the positions, but you can see there it's going a lot more on a single click. The next option is the zoom angle pitching. So you can see when I'm zoomed right out, it's looking down, and as I zoom in, the camera flattens out towards horizontal. So that's the zoom angle pitch. So if I turn that off, the camera's just go, oh, well, this is the pivot camera, so it's going straight in and out towards the pivot rather than up and down, whereas the look camera just goes straight up and down rather than, and if I turn the pitch back on, you can see up the top it's looking down. As I come down, it flattens out, and you can adjust at what point in the height that it starts to do its pitch, so you can adjust how level it gets and all that as well. I'll cover the settings in more detail once we get into the editor. Now zoom speed is when it modifies the speed of your pawn at height. So if I zoom right in, it slows down, and if I zoom out, it goes faster. So that's zooming in and then zoom out. With this disabled, you sort of feel like you're going really slow when you're up high and then faster when you're in low, but it's actually just going the same speed. Whereas this lets you to travel further distances up high and then still get that granular positioning down low, and you can adjust how much that's affected. The last setting here is the follow terrain. So at the moment, if I zoom up this hill here, I don't clip through the terrain, I just go straight over, and you can see it's sort of interpolating down the hill smoothly. And it actually, so if I fly off this cliff, it sort of smoothly dampens down, it doesn't just jolt down the cliff. Whereas going up, it'll immediately jolt up as to minimize any clipping into the ground. To toggle this off, it'll use a fixed height, which potentially could be under the terrain, but if you've got a flat map, it might work for you, or if you don't want them to have any other, you want to add a fixed height all the time, then you can see I'm not jumping up and down on the terrain or anything like that. It's smoothly moving around everywhere at that set height, and you can obviously set the height. So to get the plugin operational in a new project, you can choose any of the first person, third person templates, or the top down, or the blank. You can add this stuff in later if you need to. Make it a C++ project, name your project, put it where you want to put it. Once your project's created, you'll need a plugins folder. So if this is a new project, not your existing product, you might not have that plugin folder. So you can just create a new folder, name it plugins. And then wherever you've downloaded the plugin to, you'll probably have it in the zip file, unzip it. And then the folder structure should be just Rogue Camera, and then these content folders here, and the U plugin. So that Rogue Camera folder, you want to drag that into your plugins. And then once that's done, you can fire up your project. Once in the editor, just confirm that the plugin has installed correctly. So come to plugins, search for Rogue. You should see Rogue Camera with a tick. If you're not seeing the plugins content here in your content browser, just come to settings and show plugin content. That should enable you to see the plugins folder. And then everything lives in the Rogue Camera content folder here. To fire up the demo level, it's just in maps, and it's called camera test. To ensure that it plays correctly, just come to project settings and maps and modes, and just assign your game mode to the look camera, and that should set everything up correctly when it plays. If you're just doing it in a blank or another map, you can drop the cameras in here, and then there is optionally the pre-set up game modes just to set it to use that pawn. So it'll use the play pawn and it'll load the UI and handle all that in here. But if you just want to use the pawn on its own, you can just drop the blueprint in. So to configure the cameras, if we come to data and input definitions, this is what controls all the settings for your camera. So you've got the speeds, the angles of pitch when you're zooming in and out, that pitch angle, where you start your zoom at. And obviously I was going to make presets of these, but these are very game specific, so I'll leave that to you. The smoothing is how smoothly everything interpolates, so faster smoothing will mean it will get to the next position faster. Input multiplier is when you hold shift, it'll increase the speed, and rotation is really fast, so there's just another multiplier for that, so you can slow it down. And then under stepping, you've got that angle. If you've got rotation stepping enabled, that's the angle that it will turn at. And then same for the zoom, like if you want to bind zoom to keys up and down, then you could, on a single press, you can move a certain amount. For the pivot camera, this is the, oh no, sorry, that's the next one. That's the angle that you'll be looking down at the pivot point at. And then this pitch angle transition is where the zoom, where it tilts the camera, where it pitches the camera to look horizontal as you come in. If you adjust this down, it'll start doing the pitch later in the move. And then you've got pretty standard orthographic settings, the clipping ranges and offsets for your camera. To create a new data asset, you can edit this one. You can just go to miscellaneous data asset and search for RC definition asset, or easier way is just to duplicate this one, then move it to wherever you want to put it, and then you've got all the settings, so you can adjust off the settings there rather than trying to do it from zero. The settings that were down the side are found in project settings, Rogue Camera settings. So these will be the defaults, and if you don't want to change them at runtime, this is where you want to change them. So you can set the trace channel. If you're doing follow terrain and you have your terrain on a trace channel on its own, you can set that in here. And then the input data is for the input information. I'll show that in a second, but this is just a fallback, so the actual input can be set on the pawn, which I'll show that as well in a minute. But yeah, you can see here you can enable or disable any of those settings that we covered. So in the actual pawn itself, in case you create a new one, you come to blueprints, and in here you've got your input mapping and your definition for the camera that need to be assigned. But if you use any of these blueprints, then there it's already assigned. Unless you want to, if you're making a new settings data and you want to update it on your pawn, that's where you change it. So there's a few little bonus things in here. You've got this visual effects of the tracers here. That's all in that VFX folder. You've got the tracer effect and the material for it. The whole UI setups here, if you want to check out that, it's all done through C++ and integrated into widgets. If you've never done that before, you can check that out. And all the input setups here. One thing I didn't cover in the actual demo before was this widget up here. This is just showing you the input. So I've set up the left and right mouse button like you would for an RTS. So it's got the left mouse hold, so you could drag a box select or whatever, and it's just firing those events. And I've got the input modifiers, so you can tell which keys you're pressing. And the action key, the right mouse button, is the same. It's got the hold. So if you wanted some menu to come up or something like that, you can do that. So the whole input thing is probably technically a bonus thing as well. So you got all your actions here for the kind of your standard actions and to control the camera. And that's all configured in this context here. There is I'll show this in the C++ code review part, but there is a blueprint library for key modifiers, so the Alt, Shift, and Control. There's some blueprint functions to be able to check which key is being pressed at any time. If you want that sort of blueprint, want access to that in blueprints. If I search for modifier, and you can see under there Rogue modifiers, and you got all your modifiers here, and you can just do a check, and it's just asking for the world to get that. All right, onto the code. I'll start with the base class here. This is the Rogue camera pawn, and it sets up the camera. This is where all those main settings are configured runtime, and you've got all the settings for all the camera here that get copied over from the game camera definition. So on begin play, the default settings are grabbed from the Unreal project settings, and then the initialize camera starts. And this is where it starts passing off to all the child classes depending on what camera you're using. And that's where all the settings are moved over from the definition. And then the next class is all the input. So if you wanted to rejig the input for your own input, you could replace this class. But it's got the data asset that I was showing that you set in the blueprint, and it's configuring all the inputs here. So that's all the input setup. Got the input mode, so it's setting it to game and UI, and then applying the input mapping as well. And then you've got your modifier key set up. So all the modifier keys are stored in this enum class, just using bit shift, and it passes that around. And that's the blueprint library I was talking about. So if you can't remember how to access it, this is what you'd need to search for in blueprints. And then you've got each individual class for whichever camera type you're going to use. So one thing to just keep in mind is the ortho camera inherits from the pivot camera, because the pivot camera introduces the spring arm, and then the ortho uses the spring arm as well. That's why it's that way. But if you wanted to, say, use the look camera, then you could just inherit your project pawn off this. So if this was my project pawn and I wanted to inherit off the look camera, I could just change this to the look camera and then have whatever I normally have in my pawn class. The input comes with an input interface, so that select and action thing. If you need to put this into you want to set up what these inputs actually do, then all you need to do is inherit this interface. So if you went to, say, your project player controller, then you can just implement this interface here and then configure these to whatever you need them to be. At the moment, I'm just updating text in that display. Anything in this player controller other than the implementation is not really required for the cameras. It's all to do with just the demo. And just to show you that in the input, if you come into the input select, that's how it's just calling out to that interface. So it doesn't care where the interface is. It's saying, hey, if anyone's implemented this, I'll just select it, do what you want to do. And then just as a bonus, because I have the demo, the preview demo level with our UI, you've got all your UI widgets here if you want to check out how that is done. That's all there. Probably the main widget is the overlay widget. That's the top level one where everything's sitting on. You can see how to bind to a button in C++ and be able to, set its events and things. So that completes the overview of the Rogue RTS Camera Plugin. If you need any help, feel free to jump on the Discord and use our support forum there. Thanks for watching.